Hi, everybody. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Catherine Faulders, our White House reporter, is here. Great to have you with us on this Monday. A lot to get to today out of the Supreme Court, Capitol Hill, the campaign trail. But we start today with President Trump's re-election kickoff this week. It's a big one, Catherine. He'll be down in Florida tomorrow. And in an interview with ABC News, the president says that he wants to make health care a centerpiece of his re-election campaign. You heard that right. It's an issue voters in 2018 said was a top concern, Catherine, siding overwhelmingly, though, with Democrats in that last election.
Yeah, and this is an area that the president has obviously struggled to make progress on. You and I were talking about this before. He wasn't successful last time he did this, and that was with a Republican-controlled Congress, a Republican-controlled Senate. So, you know, many people in his own party think, hey, let's just not do this now. Let's not put a timeline on it. At least what we're hearing is that this probably won't happen until after the campaign. So
but he is perhaps trying to neutralize Democrats as he kicks off his campaign. Democrats out on the trail trying to capitalize on interest in the health care issue. So why is the president reviving his campaign promise on health care? What can we expect from the president as he kicks things off tomorrow? Let's go to our White House reporter, Jordan Phelps. She joins us from the White House North Lawn. You got some answers for those questions, Jordan? What's this all about?
Hey, Devin, yeah, healthcare was a losing issue for Republicans in the midterms, but the president thinks he can make it a winner. He says he thinks he can make the GOP the party of great healthcare. But, Devin, it's important to do a reality check here. The president might have teased to our George Stephanopoulos that he'll be rolling out a phenomenal new healthcare plan. That's what he called it, within a couple of months. But, Devin, the White House is not drafting legislative text, and there are no plans to do so. I've talked to a couple senior officials about this. What they have been doing is drafting a set of core principles that the president supports. That's something the president could obviously stump on and use to help win the election. But Devin, it wouldn't be until after the election that they'd ever actually try to do something. And there's a lot of ifs riding on that. First, the president has to keep the White House. They have to keep the Senate in Republican hands, and they have to take back the House. And so it wouldn't be until 2021, 2 years away, until anything would actually happen with this phenomenal healthcare plan the president's promising.
And Jordan, I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on this, so before we move on, I do want to just ask you, we know the president's principles on healthcare. He supported the Republican healthcare plan. It failed in the Senate with the thumbs down from John McCain. That was pretty clearly laid out. We heard him, of course, all of 2016. We know what he stands for when it comes to repealing Obamacare. Do you have any indication that the president is putting forward, looking at something new here? Is this meant to be a compromise proposal? Is there some sort of new structure or concept that he's looking at rolling out? What are we hearing on that front?
Yeah, Devin, the White House right now is keeping this under lock and key. It's still in the drafting phases, is our understanding. But really, Devin, what's going on here is the president has demanded a new health care plan. And so his administration is moving to make that happen. But you are correct in pointing out that we haven't seen any major shift in where the president stands on anything. So we shouldn't expect any new health care plan from this White House to be significantly different from the previously failed plan.
All right, Jordan Phelps, thanks for that. And Catherine, it's so interesting because as the president is talking up healthcare in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, the administration is still actively suing in federal court to eliminate Obamacare, and they don't have a proposal on the table.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to hear a lot from Democrats on Capitol Hill with this, too. As we were discussing before, Nancy Pelosi already says that this plan would have higher costs, worse coverage, it would be the end of the life-saving protections for people with pre-existing conditions. So we'll continue to hear that,
too. So a lot of ammo for Democrats headed into this, although we should say that the White House has tried to nibble around the edges on health care. They've effectively ended the individual mandate. They've allowed the sale of bare bones insurance plans with very little protections in there. They are requiring drug companies now to advertise the prices of prescription drugs in TV advertising, but the costs are continuing to rise in this country. Take a look. We actually went to the Department of Health and Human Services for a look at where health care spending is right now in this country. It's up big over the past couple of years, up almost 4% in 2017, the most recent numbers. About $10,000 per person is spent in aggregate each year in this country. That's about 18% of the nation's GDP is on healthcare spending. And just take a look at prescription drugs. This is something that gets everybody in the pocketbook. All those prescriptions are climbing. It's not just you. They're up 41%, the prices of drugs over the past 10 years in this country. Very significant cost to a lot of Americans. The situation's forcing many families now to take some extreme measures to find affordable health care. Joining us now, two of those Americans who've had to leave the country to find more affordable prescription drugs, specifically insulin, which they need to treat type 1 diabetes. Leah Greenseed joins us from St. Paul, Minnesota. She's a diabetes advocate. Also joined by Jillian Rippolone. She is from Michigan, also a diabetes advocate. Want to start with you, Leah. Thanks for joining us. So when did the light bulb go off for you that you needed to begin traveling to Canada to get these drugs? How did that come about?
Well, I learned early after my daughter was diagnosed that insulin was extremely expensive in the United States. And while traveling, we found that we could get insulin at a fraction of the cost in many countries. The idea of this trip to Canada came up just a couple months ago when I realized that there was an opportunity here in Minnesota to drive just 5 hours and to get insulin at a reduced cost. So that's what we did.
That's what you did. And Jillian, you also have made trips from Michigan up into Canada. Any concerns about the safety or quality of the drugs you're buying over the border?
No, not at all. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and so is my brother. And living in Michigan, one of the perks is that you're right on the border of Canada and Detroit. So we take the Detroit tunnel right over to Canada, which is about 30 minutes. And we stop at the border and customs, and we just explain that we're going to buy insulin. And it's so common to these custom agents that it's just kind of second nature now. And they just let you in, and then you purchase your insulin, which is the same laboratory that Novolog uses over here. It's all the same laboratory that they all use with Novo Nordisk. So there's definitely no safety concerns. And then on our way back over to the U.S. side, we just say we picked up our insulin and they let us on our merry way.
Wow, and we were seeing some pictures of the insulin you bought up in Canada there, about a tenth of the cost in some cases. Let's just remind everybody how expensive insulin is. Obviously a mainstay in American medicine. It's a critical drug. Here, just in the past 5 years, the cost nearly doubled. In 2012, it was about $2,800 on average. This includes out-of-pocket costs and insurance costs, up to, in 2016, about $5,700, and that's continued to climb. Leah, who do you blame in all of this? What do you make of when you see these prices going up? I imagine you're angry and frustrated that you have to take these steps. Where do you place the blame?
Well, certainly there's many players in the system who are making money, the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacy benefit managers. But honestly, I blame our politicians for not listening to Americans who are saying this is critically important to us and not implementing changes soon enough to give us relief.
And how about you, Jillian, when you think about this, the fact that your family, to get an affordable dose of insulin, has to go to Canada, of all places, how does that make you feel? And who are you making your feelings known on this one?
Well, I think a lot of us are using our voices in our community and also on social media platforms just to raise noise about this issue. And lawmakers right now, I know they're tackling like this insulin crisis to make insulin more affordable, but we don't know how long we're going to be waiting for this because, as you know, everything takes so long in Congress to pass and go through the Senate and Congress and everything. So it's gonna take a really long time. But I think as a community, if we could just kind of like stick together and just kind of raise advocacy every single day, I think that's what's really help with the push.
Leah, you know, the Trump administration has talked a lot about and received bipartisan support for this idea of advertising the price in those TV ads. We see them all the time, the drug ads in primetime television around our news programming. Do you think that'll make a difference when we see those ads and they have to actually put on screen how much insulin costs? Do you think that would help pressure them on the price front?
Well, I think Americans know how much prescription drugs cost, and we know that they cost too much. So I'm not overly optimistic that the advertising of the prices is going to help significantly. I think we need to pass laws right now that provide relief in the short term, and then we need to look at the whole system and encourage greater competition. In the insulin market, there are only 3 manufacturers of insulin, and they've been raising their prices lockstep now for many years. We need to get generics onto the market for insulin, and we need to be regulating the price of drugs like they do in every other country.
And finally, Jillian, I just want to ask you, we are in presidential political season here. How important is this issue to you as a voter in the presidential campaign? Where do you put this in your order of salience?
Yeah, well, for somebody that's able to vote, and I have type 1 diabetes and my brother has type 1 diabetes, we need insulin to survive. So we're going to be voting for the people that's going to be helping us get all those bills passed to help us get emergency access to insulin and making insulin affordable for all.
Top issue for a lot of people, drug prices, healthcare. Jillian Ripolone from Michigan, thank you so much. And Leah Greenside, thank you so much from St. Paul, Minnesota, my hometown, for joining us as well. Great to see you both. Thank you. Moving on now, we mentioned at the top of the show, it's the president's re-election campaign kickoff week. And there's no one else better to talk about the president's re-election campaign than our 2 intrepid Trump 2016 campaign reporters, including our veteran senior editorial producer, John Santucci, who looks so thrilled. John,
I'm recovering.
You're still recovering from that campaign
from 4 years
2016.
Ago. Yeah.
Great to see you guys.
Still a frequent flyer miles left.
Are you going down to Florida on tomorrow night?
Did you go to enough of those?
I did. No, I paid my penance to society. I'm good.
You did.
I can't listen to some Elton John songs anymore. It's like PTSD.
Yeah, it's too much. Or how about Phantom of the Opera? That one gets me every time.
Forget it.
Well, guys, let's talk a little bit about the president's re-election campaign as it gets underway. This thing is starting to look, John, very different from what you saw up close in 2016. Much more corporate, much more disciplined, not the shoestring operation that we saw with basically no staff.
Yeah, no escalators in this production. It's a very different setup. You know, if you remember the 2015 campaign when things started, it was Donald Trump's campaign from Donald Trump's building. It was actually a campaign that operated out of the 5th floor of Trump Tower, which was the old set of The Celebrity Apprentice. So think about that. Now the campaign is right here in the DC metro area. They have we've been there, beautiful campaign office. I walked around and they're like saying, okay, this is one section, now we're going to go somewhere else. It is a very, very, very long way from 5 people in Trump Tower 4 years ago. Much more traditional, much more support from the party also. I think the relationship you're going to see between the campaign and the Republican Party this time around, very different. He was the outsider.
Yeah, he's got everybody united. Still a fair bit of leaking and infighting, though, which was a hallmark of the last campaign. The case in point, these internal poll numbers from the Trump campaign, which leaked out in the past week. George Stephanopoulos, as you know, John and Catherine, asked the president about some of those poll numbers in the exclusive interview. Here's a little bit of that.
I don't believe those polls. There's no way he beats me in Texas. So
but even your own polls show you're behind right now, don't they?
No, my polls show that I'm winning everywhere.
I don't know. We've all seen these reports that with 15 out of 17 states, you spent $2 million on a poll and you're behind in 15 out of 17 states.
Nobody showed you those polls because those polls don't exist, George. Those polls don't exist. You mean I'm losing in 15 out of 17 states? Those polls don't exist. I just was given a meeting with my pollster, who I frankly don't even believe in pollsters, if you want to know the truth. You just run a campaign and whatever it is, it is. But I just had a meeting with somebody that's a pollster, and I'm winning everywhere.
That is just one of the many headlines that we spent 30 hours with the president, Devin. We were on board Air Force One, Marine One, in the Beast with the president, his limousine, and also, of course, at the West Wing and the residence for much of last Wednesday. But, you know, I do think what we saw in all the time that George spent with him, and we had been working on this interview for quite some time. Actually, George interviewed the president June 12th, 2018 in Singapore. 1 year later is when we got this. So it took us a year. We were working hard on it.
Behind the scenes? You've been in a lot of these interviews.
I have. I think that, you know, not to give a secret away to others of how I would do an interview again, but with Donald Trump not doing a formal sit-down interview, lights, camera, action, here we go, if you see the moments that made the most news, and George made news across the interview in his interview with the president, but the moments where it's more relaxed. In the back of the Beast, he's talking about the campaign, about the poll numbers with Joe Biden. In the Oval Office, he's talking about the special counsel's investigation and the relationships with Capitol Hill. You actually get a much more candid look at Donald Trump.
You can't look away. Look at these shots. I mean, it's just incredible angles that you don't see with any president.
No, and you know, listen, we had been working with the team there for quite some time. They had some ideas. We had some ideas. You know, the president is forever and always a producer-in-chief. He had opinions. I think we got to see a little bit of some of the reactions that he had with some of his senior staff kicking Mulvaney out. But it was good.
Thank you so much. You can see the full 30 hours with President Trump is airing right here on ABC News Live later tonight, 7 p.m. if you missed it yesterday, 7 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. You can catch it several times tonight in full, and it is a really interesting watch, really insightful. John Santucci, thank you so much. Catherine Folders, thank you very much. We pivot now here in the briefing room down to the Democratic race. The Democratic candidates who have been out on the trail over the past couple of weeks are here in Washington today attending a forum at the Poor People's Campaign, an initiative founded by Martin Luther King Jr. to draw attention to economic justice for people of low-income backgrounds in the United States. Our political reporter Beatrice Peterson is there on site. Beatrice, great to see you. So former Vice President Joe Biden just finished up addressing the group. What was his message and how was he received?
Well, thank you for having me, Devin. He was received kind of with the lukewarm reception. A lot of the attendees here at this event seemed like they were really excited to see Warren and Bernie Sanders, not Biden so much. He spoke a little bit about his history and his background, his family's background with working with people of color and communities of color. His wife, Joe Biden, got a shout out at the beginning. It's their 42nd wedding anniversary. But during his remarks, he admitted that perhaps he had some comments about racial inequality. He said, quote, "I vastly underestimated how deep and systemic racism is and why, in fact, it never gives up." That comment really didn't get a big applause from the crowd, but they were listening. A lot of people were very attuned to what he was saying, and it was a very interesting dynamic in the room.
Yeah, a parade of the candidates coming after him as well, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in particular have made economic inequality a cornerstone of their campaign, right? I mean, caring for the poor isn't usually a top talker on the campaign trail, but those two have prioritized it.
Yes, and right after Biden spoke, Andrew Yang spoke, and one of his key messages is $1,000 for Americans. That didn't really seem to get much of an applause line from the crowd. Later in the day, Marianne Williams, I believe, is speaking right now. Warren will speak. Senator Kamala Harris will speak as well. So there's a full slate of candidates at this event in Washington, D.C. Here listening to see what the candidates have to say about poverty in America.
All right, Beatrice Peterson, thanks so much. Much more you're reporting on abcnews.com. You can catch some of that Poor People's Campaign conference later on World News Tonight. Thanks to her for that. Turning now to the Supreme Court, it was a big day up there as the justices look to finish up their controversial and contentious term. There were 4 new opinions released today, and they took action on a number of petitions. Our legal analyst Kate Shaw and I were at the Supreme Court this morning for all the action. Kate, great to see you again.
Hey, Devin.
You're back in New York. Let's start with the court's decision today on double jeopardy. I think most people know that the Constitution says you can't be tried twice for the same crime, but the justices today affirmed that there's an exception to that.
Right. So there was this big question of whether the justices might actually roll back the rule that says, okay, you can't be tried twice for the same crime, but you can be tried twice if you're being tried by different prosecutors. So if the feds go after you, that doesn't stop the state officials from going after you subsequently, and vice versa. So we had a real question whether the court might revisit that rule and actually rule that double jeopardy prohibited a subsequent prosecution, even by what's called a separate sovereign. And here the court decided to essentially essentially stay the course and reaffirm the rule that allowed these successive prosecutions, again, so long as it's not the same entity doing the prosecuting.
Yeah, and in this case, it was a convicted felon from Alabama who happened to have a firearm in his car. He was prosecuted by both the state and by the federal government, hit with penalties for both, and the court today upheld those. But I also wanted to ask you about the implications for pardon power, because a lot of people were watching this case to see if potentially the president's pardon power could be expanded.
Well, so I think that the thinking was that for individuals in the president's orbit, like Paul Manafort, who have been convicted for federal crimes, if in fact the president chose to exercise his pardon power, which of course he could still do, what power would states have to essentially prosecute him for the same kind of conduct, but for different offenses? And coming out of today's opinion, there's nothing in the federal Constitution that would stop a state from essentially pursuing charges against, say, a Paul Manafort, even if he had been pardoned by the president for federal offenses. Now, I should say some states have actually erected their own limitations in terms of whether they'll go after someone who's already had a federal conviction and then, say, a federal pardon. But you know, there isn't, essentially it's the status quo remaining intact, and so that is good for state officials who might want the ability to, say, bring subsequent prosecutions even in the face of a federal pardon.
Fascinating. So potentially some implication there for people caught up in some crimes around the president, financial crimes perhaps in the state of New York. We will see. Finally, I want to just ask you, Kate, about this this case that the Supreme Court sort of engaged on but punted back to the lower courts. This one involves a case of religious liberty, same-sex marriage. A couple of bakers in Oregon refused to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple. Tell us about what the court did here.
You know, after sitting on this case for quite some time, the court sent it back down for another look, and that strikes me as sending a message that they wanted to avoid a really divisive ruling and instead to give the lower court a chance to take another pass. They're still feeling each other out. You know, this is the first term of the Kavanaugh court, and I do think they are trying to avoid weighing in unnecessarily on divisive issues. So I suspect that was what was at play in this case.
All right, senior legal analyst Kate Shaw joining us from New York. We'll see you back down here on Thursday or next week, Kate.
Thanks,
Great
Devin.
to see you. Thanks so
too.
much for coming in. Finally today, it is the heat of summer travel season, and it doesn't look like those Boeing 737 MAX planes getting up there anytime soon. Our senior transportation correspondent David Curley is here. Great to see you, David.
You too.
It's the Paris Air Show, and Boeing is in the spotlight. They're taking a lot of heat. What are they saying about when these planes will get back on the air?
They're not setting a date. They say before the end of the year. That's as far as the CEO will go. But it really has changed the Paris Air Show this year. This is a show where you bring your wares and say, hey, what would you like to buy? For Boeing, completely different this year. It really is a mea culpa, an apology tour to apologize to the families and the airlines because of those two 737 MAX crashes. They would love to sell some aircraft, but that doesn't seem to be the mood right now at the Paris Air Show. So Airbus has already sold some aircraft at the show, their arch rival, including a new mid-size jetliner, which is what both Boeing and Airbus think is the future market that they need to be in, and Boeing still basically is not decided what they're going to build in that middle size.
They've really been in a bind with the bad press over the 737 MAX and the safety investigations. What's the road ahead for this? I mean, we were told first by the airplane maker that by this summer, perhaps we could see some of those planes. How far out now is that horizon of getting them back up? Do you think?
Boeing is done with its software update that it says will fix the MAX, giving 3 additional levels of security so that this part of an anti-stall system doesn't activate again. They are waiting for the FAA to say, okay, we want to take a test flight. We thought that was going to happen several weeks ago. The FAA asked for additional information. It's probably coming in the next week or two. The FAA tells us it's not going to be this week. That flight is very important because that will signal, if everything goes well, that Boeing then can submit the software fix for certification. Then the FAA will probably take a couple of weeks to say thumbs up or thumbs down. They've been very involved throughout the process, so they know exactly what the software is doing.
And there were some reports today that perhaps Boeing might consider changing the name of the plane because so many passengers are afraid of hearing, you know, you're on a 737 MAX and panic. Is that on the table for them?
It's problematic. The CEO said no. This first came from the president, actually. Mr. Trump said that they should just rebrand it and call it something else. If they do that, you have to recertify the aircraft. They're trying to recertify a piece of software right now. To rebrand and to recertify the entire aircraft could be quite difficult to do. And then if you call it something else, when you get on the plane, you can probably still figure out whether or not it's a MAX.
So by the end of the summer, perhaps early fall, we could see some of these back up in the air. Meantime, before we let you go, how impactful will this grounding be through the summer? Have the airlines absorbed this? And are we still expecting to see worsening delays because of this? What's kind of the real impact?
So for the 3 airlines that fly it, American, Southwest, and United, it has been difficult because they've got all the aircraft they can get out.
They planned for these planes. They're big planes.
Correct. But they've known it's been coming, and they've been telling passengers. In fact, American just extended and Southwest into early September. What has happened, though, is those that don't fly it, Delta, JetBlue, Alaska, if they can get some planes out of maintenance, then they can absorb some of those seats and some of that demand.
There's a competitive advantage there as
well.
Good
news, bad news, depending on whether you fly it or not.
All right. Thanks a lot, David, for coming in the briefing room. Appreciate the update on the 737. Thank you for watching us today here on ABC News Live. We're here every day, 3:30, 5:30, and 6:30 Eastern Time. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you tomorrow.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.